Good morning, everyone. Let's start with a truth we often don't want to admit: silence can be excruciating. When someone we care about goes silent, no messages, no calls, no contact, it's easy to let fear and self-doubt fill that void. Today, I want to explore what that silence might really mean and how we can navigate it with courage and resilience. Silence can feel like a void, a space filled with questions, doubts, and fears. When someone we care about goes silent, it's easy to let our minds wander to dark places. We interpret their lack of communication as rejection, convincing ourselves that we've been forgotten, dismissed, or deemed unworthy of their attention. But silence doesn't always mean what we think it does. In fact, it often means something entirely different. The human brain is wired for connection. We are meaning makers by nature, and when there's a gap in communication, we instinctively fill it with stories. Unfortunately, those stories are rarely kind. They often revolve around our insecurities. They don't care about me anymore. I must have done something wrong, or I wasn't enough. These narratives are loud and insistent, feeding off our fears and vulnerabilities. But the truth is, silence is not necessarily about rejection. Sometimes it's about the other person's needs, struggles, or circumstances, things that have little to do with us. When we interpret silence as rejection, we lose sight of a fundamental truth: every person is navigating their own inner world. That inner world can be filled with challenges we might not know about: grief, stress, uncertainty, or a need for solitude. Silence might be their way of coping, of finding clarity, or of managing emotions they haven't yet figured out how to express. Their decision to step back doesn't mean they value us any less. It often means they're grappling with something that requires their full attention. It's also important to remember that communication styles differ. Some people process their emotions internally and prefer to step away before re-engaging with others. This doesn't mean they've forgotten you, it means they're taking the time they need to show up fully. In a world that prizes instant responses and constant availability, choosing silence can be an act of self-care rather than disregard for someone else. It's a reminder that we all operate differently, and those differences don't diminish the bonds we share. Silence can also reflect an unspoken boundary and need for space to think, feel, or heal. Boundaries are not about keeping others out, they're about preserving the energy and focus required to navigate personal challenges. When someone sets a boundary through silence, it's not a rejection of you, but an affirmation of their needs. Respecting that boundary, even when it's painful, is a way of honoring the connection and trusting that it's strong enough to withstand periods of distance. Another critical piece of this puzzle is the stories we tell ourselves in the absence of contact. Brené Brown often talks about the importance of identifying the story I'm making up when we assume silence equals rejection. We're often projecting our own fears onto the situation. Instead of jumping to conclusions, we can approach the silence with curiosity and compassion. What else might be true? Could they be overwhelmed, distracted, or in need of time to recharge? Asking these questions helps us shift from fear-based assumptions to a mindset of understanding. Ultimately, silence challenges us to trust in the strength of our connections. It's a test of our ability to hold space for uncertainty without letting it erode our sense of self-worth. Silence isn't easy, it's uncomfortable, and often heartbreaking, but it doesn't have to be a reflection of rejection. Instead, it can be an opportunity to practice patience, empathy, and self-compassion. In those moments of quiet, remind yourself of what you know to be true about your relationship. The love, respect, and shared experiences don't disappear in silence. They remain even when words don't. Trust that what you've built together is real and meaningful. Trust that silence is not the end of the story, but a pause, a space where healing or understanding can take root. And most importantly, trust in your own worth, knowing that someone else's silence doesn't define it. Vulnerability is one of the most uncomfortable experiences we face, yet it's also one of the most profoundly human. When someone we care about goes silent, no calls, no messages, no explanations, it can feel like we're left standing in a void. That void is filled with uncertainty, and uncertainty has a way of making us feel small, exposed, and powerless. But this space of not knowing, as painful as it is also an invitation to grow. It's an opportunity to embrace vulnerability and lean into its discomfort, rather than letting it overwhelm us. When we think about vulnerability, we often associate it with being open, sharing our truths, or showing our emotions, but vulnerability is equally present in the moments when we're left waiting, wondering, and sitting in the silence. It's the willingness to stay in the space of the unknown without rushing to conclusions or trying to protect ourselves with blame or avoidance. This kind of vulnerability requires courage because it forces us to confront our fears of abandonment, rejection, or not being enough. The void created by silence is fertile ground for our inner critic to take center stage. That voice in our head starts spinning narratives: they don't care about me anymore, I must have done something wrong, or I'm not worth their time. These stories feel real because they're rooted in our deepest insecurities, but here's the truth: those stories are rarely accurate. They are a defense mechanism, an attempt to make sense of the silence by assigning meaning to it. Unfortunately, the meaning we assign often says more about our fears than it does about reality. Leaning into vulnerability means recognizing these stories for what they are: projections of our own anxieties, and choosing not to let them define us. It means being brave enough to say, I don't know why they've gone silent, but I'm not going to let this uncertainty dictate how I feel about myself. This is not about dismissing your emotions, it's about acknowledging them without letting them take over. You can feel hurt, confused, or even angry without jumping to conclusions about what their silence means. The void can also be a space where empathy grows. When someone steps back from communication, they may be dealing with struggles we cannot see. Vulnerability asks us to consider the possibility that their silence isn't about us, but about something they're facing. Maybe they're overwhelmed, grieving, or trying to process their own emotions. While it's tempting to focus on how their absence impacts us, vulnerability challenges us to shift our perspective and hold space for their experience, even when it's unclear. At the same time, being vulnerable doesn't mean ignoring your own needs or minimizing your feelings. It's okay to feel hurt or to wish for clarity. Part of embracing vulnerability is allowing yourself to feel those emotions without judgment. It's about showing up for yourself in the same way you would show up for someone else, with compassion, patience, and understanding. The void created by silence is also an opportunity to strengthen your relationship with yourself. When someone else's actions or lack thereof leave you feeling uncertain, you can turn inward and ask, what do I need right now to feel grounded? Vulnerability in this context is about being honest with yourself. Maybe you need to journal, talk to a trusted friend, or simply sit with your feelings. Whatever it is, leaning into vulnerability means allowing yourself to take those steps without shame or fear of being too much. Finally, vulnerability in the void teaches us about trust. Trusting that the connection you shared with someone doesn't disappear in silence. Trusting that they are doing the best they can, just as you are. And perhaps most importantly, trusting yourself, your ability to navigate uncertainty, to hold space for both your emotions and theirs, and to find your way forward no matter the outcome. The void may feel like a dark, uncertain place, but it's also where resilience is born. It's where we learn to stay open, even when it's hard, and to let go of the need for immediate answers. In the end, vulnerability in the void is not about fixing the silence, it's about finding strength within it. Love is one of the most universal human experiences, yet it's expressed in profoundly different ways. When someone we care about stops reaching out, no calls, no texts, no messages, it's easy to interpret their silence as a lack of care or love. But the truth is that people express love in ways that may not align with our expectations, and sometimes love doesn't look like constant communication. Understanding this is not only a gift we give to others, but also a way to deepen our own capacity for connection. We live in a world that often equates love with presence, being physically or emotionally available at all times. While presence is undoubtedly important, it's not the only way people show they care. Some express their love through acts of service, quietly working behind the scenes to make life easier for the people they cherish. Others prefer quality time, saving their energy for meaningful interactions rather than frequent check-ins. Still, others need space to process their emotions or recharge, and that space doesn't diminish the depth of their feelings. It's crucial to remember that love is not a one-size-fits-all experience. Every person brings their unique history, culture, and personality to their relationships, shaping how they connect with others. For some, constant communication feels like love. For others, it may feel overwhelming or even inauthentic. Neither approach is wrong, they're just different. The challenge and the beauty of relationships is learning to understand and appreciate these differences without taking them personally. When someone loves differently than we do, it can be easy to misinterpret their actions or their silences. For example, someone who values physical touch might struggle to feel loved by a partner who expresses their affection through words. Similarly, a person who thrives on daily communication might feel hurt when a loved one goes quiet for days or weeks. These mismatches in love languages can create tension, but they're not insurmountable. They are opportunities for deeper understanding and connection. Part of this understanding comes from recognizing that people's expressions of love are often shaped by their circumstances. Someone who's navigating stress, grief, or personal challenges may not have the capacity to show love in ways we're accustomed to. Their silence doesn't mean they've stopped caring, it means they're doing the best they can with the resources they have. Extending empathy in these moments requires us to step back from our own needs and consider theirs. It's not about diminishing our feelings, but about holding space for their experience. Another layer to this is recognizing that some people show love in ways that aren't immediately visible. They might be thinking of you, rooting for you, or carrying your presence in their heart, even if they don't say it out loud. This kind of love doesn't always come with grand gestures or frequent reminders, but it's no less real. In fact, it can be deeply enduring, anchored in the quiet belief that the connection doesn't need constant validation to exist. This perspective requires trust in the connection you've built and in the other person's intentions. It's about resisting the urge to measure love by how it looks on the surface and instead focusing on its substance. Love isn't always about what we receive, it's about what we share, even when it doesn't look the way we expect. At the same time, acknowledging that people love in different ways doesn't mean we should ignore our own needs. It's okay to want more communication, more reassurance, or more expressions of care. Healthy relationships thrive on mutual understanding, which includes being honest about what makes you feel loved while also being open to the other person's perspective. This kind of dialogue can help bridge the gap between different love languages and create a deeper, more authentic connection. Ultimately, the diversity in how people love is what makes relationships so rich and complex. It teaches us patience, empathy, and the art of meeting each other where we are. People love in different ways, and that's not a flaw or a failure. It's a reflection of the infinite ways human beings can connect. By embracing this truth, we create space for love to flourish in all its forms, even in the silences, the spaces, and the moments when it doesn't look the way we expect. Boundaries are one of the most misunderstood aspects of relationships. Too often, we associate them with rejection, coldness, or the desire to push people away. In reality, boundaries are an act of self-respect, a way of honoring your own needs and well-being while still valuing the connections you share with others. They're not about building walls, they're about creating clear, intentional spaces where you and others can thrive. At their core, boundaries define where you end and another person begins. They're the invisible lines that protect your emotional, mental, and physical energy. Setting a boundary doesn't mean you care less about someone else. It means you care enough about yourself to know what you need to feel safe, respected, and healthy. This isn't selfish, it's essential. You cannot pour from an empty cup. And without boundaries, it's all too easy to deplete yourself in ways that leave you feeling drained, resentful, or overwhelmed. It's important to understand that boundaries are not acts of aggression. They don't say, I don't want you in my life. Instead, they say, I want you in my life, but in a way that respects both of us. This distinction is critical because it reframes boundaries as a form of connection rather than disconnection. They create clarity, ensuring that both parties know where they stand and what is needed to maintain a healthy relationship. Setting boundaries often requires a level of vulnerability that can feel uncomfortable. It means being honest about your limits and trusting that the other person will respect them. But honesty is the foundation of meaningful relationships. When you communicate your boundaries clearly and kindly, you're giving others the opportunity to understand and support you. This doesn't mean they'll always agree or that it won't be difficult at times, but it does set the stage for mutual respect and understanding. Boundaries also challenge us to let go of guilt. For many people, saying no feels like a betrayal, especially if they're used to prioritizing others over themselves. But here's the truth: boundaries are not about shutting others out, they're about letting yourself in. They remind you that your time, energy, and emotions are valuable and that protecting them is not only your right, but your responsibility. When you set boundaries, you're modeling self-respect, which can inspire others to do the same in their lives. It's equally important to recognize and honor the boundaries others set. When someone steps back or communicates a limit, it's not a reflection of your worth or their lack of care for you. It's a sign that they're prioritizing their own well-being. Respecting their boundaries, even if it's hard, is an act of love. It says, I see you, I hear you, and I value what you need. This mutual respect strengthens relationships by fostering trust and understanding. Boundaries are particularly important in moments of silence or distance. When someone pulls away, no calls, no texts, no messages, it can feel personal, even painful. But their need for space is often about them, not you. They may be navigating challenges, processing emotions, or simply recharging. Respecting their boundary in these moments doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you honor their journey while trusting the strength of your connection. Of course, setting and respecting boundaries isn't always easy. It takes practice, patience, and courage. You might worry about how others will react or fear that setting limits will push people away. But the reality is that healthy relationships thrive on clear communication and mutual respect. Boundaries are not barriers, they're bridges to deeper, more authentic connections. They create the conditions for love, care, and understanding to flourish. In the end, boundaries are about self-respect, but they're also about love for yourself and for the people you choose to share your life with. They are a reminder that the best relationships are those where both parties feel seen, heard, and valued, not at the expense of their own well-being, but in a way that honors it. By embracing boundaries, you're not only protecting your peace, you're creating space for the kind of connections that uplift and sustain you. The stories we tell ourselves have an incredible power over how we perceive the world and our place in it. These internal narratives shape our actions, our emotions, and even our relationships. Often, we are unaware of the stories we're creating, and as a result, we let them drive our lives in ways that may not be entirely truthful or helpful. When faced with uncertainty or silence, we can easily slip into the habit of telling ourselves stories that are shaped by fear, insecurity, or past experiences, stories that may not be based on reality but on assumptions and projections of our own inner world. These stories are particularly powerful in moments of distance or disconnection. When someone we care about stops reaching out, no calls, no messages, no contact, it's natural to fill the silence with our own narrative. They don't care about me anymore, we might think. I've done something wrong, they've forgotten about me. These stories feel so real because they are rooted in our fears and vulnerabilities. They tap into our deepest insecurities and magnify them, creating a narrative that's often exaggerated or distorted. The silence becomes a blank canvas, and our minds quickly paint it with the worst possible scenario. What we fail to recognize in these moments is that our stories are not facts. They are interpretations, mental constructions built on incomplete information. When we don't have all the answers, we tend to fill in the gaps with what we fear the most. We assume that the absence of communication means the end of the relationship or the loss of connection, but that assumption is a story, not a truth. The absence could be due to a million other factors. The other person may be dealing with their own struggles, needing space, or simply caught up in life's demands. Their silence doesn't automatically mean they've forgotten or rejected us. It's just a moment in the ongoing narrative of life. The key to breaking free from the grip of these stories is to challenge them. Brené Brown often talks about the importance of examining the stories we make up and questioning their validity. She calls it checking the narrative. When we find ourselves spiraling into negative thoughts, it's essential to pause and ask ourselves, what's the story I'm making up here? Is it based on facts, or am I projecting my fears onto the situation? More often than not, the story we're telling ourselves isn't the whole truth. It's just a limited perspective based on our own emotional state. By becoming aware of these stories, we can start to separate fact from fiction and choose a different narrative, one that's more compassionate and grounded in reality. For example, instead of assuming someone has stopped caring because they're not reaching out, we could consider other possibilities. Maybe they're going through something tough and just don't have the energy to communicate right now, or perhaps they need some space, and that's okay. These alternative narratives allow us to shift from a place of fear and hurt to a place of understanding and empathy. It's not about denying our emotions or pretending that everything is fine when it's not. It's about expanding our view and considering that the silence may not be about us at all. The stories we tell ourselves also shape how we view our own worth. When we base our self-esteem on how others treat us or on external validation, it becomes easy to fall into the trap of negative self-talk. We begin to believe that we are only worthy of love and connection if we are constantly in touch, constantly available, or constantly being affirmed by others. But this is another story we create, one that keeps us tethered to unhealthy patterns of people-pleasing, insecurity, and self-doubt. Real self-worth, however, comes from within. It comes from understanding that we are worthy of love and respect simply because we exist, not because of how others behave toward us. Challenging the stories we tell ourselves is a practice, one that requires patience, self-awareness, and a willingness to sit with discomfort. It's about acknowledging our fears and doubts without letting them define us. It's about seeing the bigger picture, beyond the limited view our anxieties might offer. The more we practice this, the more we create a narrative that empowers us, one where we can love ourselves, accept our imperfections, and trust that we don't need to have all the answers to feel whole. Ultimately, the stories we tell ourselves have the power to either trap us in fear or set us free in understanding. When we learn to check those stories and rewrite them with empathy, compassion, and curiosity, we open ourselves up to a deeper, more authentic connection with both ourselves and others. The silence doesn't have to be filled with fear. It can be filled with hope, possibility, and trust that the story is still unfolding. Letting go of control can be one of the most liberating yet challenging practices we face. We often operate from a place of control because it gives us a sense of security, predictability, and comfort. We believe that if we manage everything around us, our relationships, our work, our environment, we will avoid chaos, disappointment, and pain. However, this need for control often comes at a high-cost anxiety, exhaustion, and the inability to experience life fully. True freedom lies in the ability to surrender control, not as a sign of weakness, but as an act of trust both in ourselves and in the universe around us. When we try to control everything, we're essentially resisting the flow of life. Life, by its very nature, is unpredictable. People change, circumstances shift, and the future is unknown. No amount of planning, effort, or worry can change that. Yet we often feel the urge to shape every detail, to keep everything within our grasp, believing that by doing so, we can prevent things from going wrong. This is an illusion. While we can control our actions and decisions, we cannot control other people, external events, or the natural course of things. When we try, we create unnecessary stress, internal conflict, and feelings of inadequacy. Letting go of control doesn't mean we abandon responsibility or become passive. It's about releasing the need to manipulate outcomes or dictate the exact path forward. It's about trusting that things will unfold as they should, even if it doesn't look the way we expected. This doesn't happen overnight. It's a practice that requires vulnerability, patience, and courage. It means recognizing that we are not always in charge of what happens, but we are in charge of how we respond. One of the most difficult aspects of letting go of control is the fear of the unknown. We've all experienced moments where uncertainty feels like a threat to our well-being. It's natural to want to cling to what's familiar, to the idea that we can predict or influence what comes next. But the truth is, the unknown is where growth, creativity, and transformation lie. It's in the moments of surrender that we open ourselves up to new opportunities and experiences we may have never considered. Letting go of control allows us to embrace life's natural ebb and flow, to find peace in the midst of chaos, and to develop resilience in the face of uncertainty. Letting go also means relinquishing the need for approval or validation from others. Often we control our behavior to gain approval, to meet expectations, or to fit into a mold that others have created for us. But in doing so, we disconnect from our authentic selves. Letting go of this need for external validation frees us to be true to who we are, regardless of others' opinions. We begin to act from a place of self-trust, choosing what feels right for us rather than seeking permission or approval. The practice of letting go requires a shift in mindset. Instead of focusing on the outcome or the how of things, we begin to focus on the process. We shift from a mentality of I have to control this to I can only do my best and trust that things will unfold as they are meant to. This shift opens up space for creativity, flexibility, and a deeper connection to ourselves and others. It allows us to be present in the moment rather than preoccupied with managing every aspect of our lives. One of the biggest barriers to letting go of control is perfectionism. We often believe that if we can do everything perfectly, we will avoid mistakes, disappointments, or failures, but perfectionism is an illusion. It's rooted in fear, the fear that we are not enough unless we do everything flawlessly. Letting go of control means embracing imperfection, both in ourselves and in others. It's about accepting that mistakes are part of the human experience and that they don't define our worth. When we let go of the need to be perfect, we create space for growth, learning, and deeper connections with others. Ultimately, letting go of control is a practice of surrendering to life. It's about trusting that even in the moments of uncertainty or discomfort, we are capable of handling whatever comes our way. It's about embracing vulnerability, acknowledging that we can't control everything, and learning to navigate the world with grace and resilience. When we let go of the need to control, we open ourselves up to a life filled with more peace, freedom, and possibility. We no longer have to grasp tightly at the reins of life. We can relax into the flow, trusting that we are exactly where we need to be.